Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Joe Volker from the EBMUD, and I'm excited to kick off tonight's session of our Water Wednesday educational series. For those of you joining us for the first time, Water Wednesdays are all about giving our customers a behind-the-scenes look at how we operate. We share everything from conservation tips to infrastructure updates to insights on how we keep our water system running smoothly, all while building a sense of community around this vital resource. Tonight's topic, bracing for impact, will our water system withstand the big one, is incredibly timely. We're focusing on earthquake preparedness, and this event takes place just one day before the 35th anniversary of the Loma Prieta earthquake, a moment that forever transformed how we approach disaster planning here in the Bay Area. As we reflect on this pivotal event, let's take a moment to think back to that day. Picture yourself in the midst of it. Whether you're at home, stuck in traffic, or perhaps watching the World Series, those memories remind us how suddenly everything can change, highlighting the importance of being prepared for the unexpected. As we reflect on this pivotal moment, let's take a moment to think. I'm sorry, I apologize. Now, let's take a moment to briefly go into tonight's agenda. We'll hear from Dr. Ann Wein from the United States Geological Survey, who will present on the HayWired Scenario, and Dave Briggs from EBMUD, who will discuss our emergency preparedness efforts. And then we'll conclude with a question and answer session where your questions will take center stage. I also wanted to discuss how you can engage with us tonight. We want to hear from you. So while you're watching, feel free to use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions for our experts as they present. Our team will curate those questions and read them aloud during the question and answer session at the end. This is your opportunity to get the answers you need, so don't hold back. For those of you who are watching in the future on YouTube, welcome. Please remember to hit the like and subscribe button to our channel and click the alert icon. Your support helps us grow and reach more people with vital information about water, conservation, and emergency preparedness. With that out of the way, I did want to highlight that tomorrow marks Imagine a Day Without Water. This National Day of Awareness encourages communities across the country to reflect on the essential role that water plays in our lives. From the moment we wake up and brush our teeth to the water we drink and the food we eat, everything depends on having reliable, clean water at our fingertips. But earthquakes and other natural disasters could disrupt that supply in an instant. It's not just an abstract thought. This is a very real concern that we face here in the Bay Area. Earthquakes could damage our pipelines, our reservoirs, and treatment plants, cutting off access to water when we need it most. So tomorrow, as we observe Imagine a Day Without Water, think about what it would mean to turn on the tap and not have any water come out. Not just for a few hours, but potentially for days or even weeks. It's a stark reminder of why we're working so hard here at EBMUD to build resilience into our system. So while you participate in this webinar, know that it's part of a much larger conversation about safeguarding this vital resource for the future. Because imagining a day without water is one thing, but living it is another. With that being said, I'd like to start the presentation. I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Ann Wein from the United States Geological Survey. If you've ever wondered what the future holds in terms of natural disasters, Dr. Wein is the person to listen to. She's at the forefront of understanding how earthquakes, like the ones we all know are possible here in the Bay Area, impact not just our buildings and infrastructure, but our communities as a whole. One of her most significant contributions is the HayWired Scenario, a highly detailed, cutting-edge model that illustrates what a 7.0 earthquake on the Hayward Fault would look like right here in the East Bay. And I don't need to tell the audience how to think about that while as we're emphasizing this is the big one. But what's remarkable about Dr. Wein's work isn't just the physical damage predictions, it's about resilience, how we as a community can recover, rebuild, and adapt in the face of such a disaster. She's worked closely with urban planners, emergency managers, and decision makers across the board to ensure that we are not only aware of the risks, but equipped on how to handle them. Tonight, Dr. Wein is going to take us inside the HayWired Scenario and help us understand what we need to do to be better prepared for the inevitable. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Wein to present. Dr. Wein, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks everyone out there. Good evening. So this Water Wednesday event exemplifies collaborations between the US Geological Survey and EBMUD. So hundreds of people have developed the story of the HayWired Scenario, and each contributor is essential to every part that you'll see. So EBMUD has helped USGS translate our science about earthquakes into impacts to the water systems and services, and has made other contributions that I will highlight. I will present on some aspects of the HayWired scenario, and which is the magnitude 7 earthquake on the Hayward Fault in the East Bay. But first, for context, next. Tomorrow is the Great Shakeout Drill on the 35th anniversary of the Loma Prieta earthquake, as Joe just told us. The Shakeout Drill was an outreach activity for the Shakeout Scenario. That was the first USGS multi-hazard scenario completed with many partners in 2008. So that scenario was an earthquake on the San Andreas Fault in Southern California. So HayWired brought this whole process into Northern California. The anniversary of the 1989 magnitude 6.9 Loma Prieta earthquake is significant too, because from an epicenter in the Santa Cruz Mountains, shaking was widely felt throughout the Bay Area, as many of you probably remember, and caused liquefaction as far away as San Francisco in the East Bay, and an expressway collapsed in Oakland. So a lot was learned from this earthquake at all levels of science, engineering, and community. And we've built this knowledge into the HayWired scenario. But before we talk about HayWired, I want to give you one other perspective of seismology in the Bay Area since the mid-1800s. Next. So in the big scheme of things, in our lifetimes, the seismicity in the Bay Area has been relatively quiet. You can see the numbers and magnitudes of earthquakes leading up to and around the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fire, compared to more recently, of which the Loma Prieta earthquake has been the largest. So earthquakes tend to cluster in time and space. So looking ahead, USGS scientists estimate the likelihood of earthquakes based on the past and their understanding of fault behavior. So to the right, the map shows a 72% chance of a large earthquake in the Bay Area in the next 30 years. That average chance is now 73% because it's 10 years since the estimate was published. Almost half of the chance is assigned to the Hayward Fault, which runs through where you are living and the East EBMUD system. However, an earthquake can occur anytime on any of these faults. Next. So the likelihood of a Hayward Fault rupture is one clue about why we developed the HayWired scenario. Another way to look at it is that the Hayward Fault has ruptured every 100 to 220 years. So it's been quite regular and it's been 156 years since the Great Earthquake in 1868. Furthermore, the fault is one of the most urbanized active faults in the United States because we're built on top of it. Hundreds of buildings and hundreds of roads, hundreds of fiber optic cables and pipelines cross the fault. Next. There's various ways the Hayward Fault could rupture. Next, and how it might rupture to the surface. So if it ruptures to the surface, then it disturbs any of those, what we call lifelines crossing it. So in the HayWired scenario, the fault ruptures 52 miles in 18 seconds. The surface offset is up to 2 meters. That's how much anything crossing it could be offset, up to 2 meters. And that's the vertical bars on the map. The offset disturbs the lifeline crossings counted in the figures on the right. So the orange disturbances are at the time of the earthquake, and the blue ones are due to what we call afterslip. So because the Hayward Fault is a creeping fault, you may have seen the curb offsets in the city of Hayward. That means the Hayward Fault may not be a clean break, and the fault will keep slipping afterwards for weeks, months, and years. But as time goes, that rate of shifting of the fault will decrease. Next. Is that playing? Yes. There we go. There's the fault rupture. As the fault ruptures, the ground shakes in the HayWired scenario. The fault ruptured bidirectionally from an epicenter in Oakland to the north and the south. And the shaking is amplified in sedimentary basins. So you can see that from the irregular shape of the red that represents the shaking intensity. So you'd feel shaking for 30 seconds, which will feel like a long time. And in the red areas, you cannot stay standing. Also in these areas, damage to vulnerable buildings is considerable, and even in some well-designed buildings. So many buildings will not be functional immediately after a magnitude 7 earthquake on the Hayward Fault. Next. If you have my shake or other early warning shake alert system, the warning time for the strongest shaking at your location is a few seconds, most likely. Within the red circle, you may receive the alert afterwards. The HayWired scenario asks the question of what would you do with a few extra seconds of warning to protect yourself from being thrown to the ground and from falling objects. The shakeout drill tomorrow is a time to practice this. For a Loma Prieta type earthquake, the East Bay would receive more warning, maybe on the order of 10 seconds. Next. Ground shaking causes liquefaction and landslides. So liquefaction is when the ground loses its strength and foundations can sink and infrastructure can be pulled apart. The conditions for liquefaction are loose sandy soils and a high water table. In the Bay Area, this means artificial fill and along streams. The probability of landslides initiating was modeled by the California Geological Survey, and they used data from the Loma Prieta earthquake landslides. So you can see how we learn from every event and then build it into what we understand could happen. Next. The HayWired scenario is the first to incorporate an earthquake sequence from the start. Remember what I said about earthquakes clustering in time and space? Well, when there's a large earthquake, it triggers more earthquakes. And I was motivated by my research with New Zealand colleagues about the communication of aftershock forecasts during the Canterbury earthquake sequence when an aftershock caused the most damage to the city of Christchurch, more so than the main shock, which had occurred further out in a rural area. So in the HayWired scenario, the magnitude 7 main shock on the Hayward Fault is followed by thousands of aftershocks, of which 16 are greater than magnitude 5. The animation shows a HayWired earthquake sequence shaking the San Francisco Bay Area for 2 years. And you might have noticed that the aftershocks migrated into Silicon Valley, and the shaking is stronger in some places there than it would have been even felt from the main shock. However, this is just one earthquake sequence simulation for the HayWired scenario, and there's endless possibilities. The aftershock sequence could stay close to the Hayward Fault or cluster in the north or the east of the fault. Next. So now we get to say why is it called HayWired? Well, it's sort of a morph on Hayward Fault and things going haywire, but then also an emphasis on wired. So wired for our wired wireless world technology, and wired for sort of the interconnectedness of all our systems, the potential for cascading hazards and such, which present vulnerabilities, but also opportunities for being resilient. So I've described the ground floor of this, the building of the scenario, and that was the hazards. And we're going to go up to the second floor for a little bit tonight and go into the lifelines room, which is the roads and the utilities. And we'll also take a peek into the fire following earthquake room next to it. Next. But we really don't have much more time at this time. So to understand the lifeline impacts, we collaborate in different ways with BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit, Caltrans on bridges, the telecommunications industry, PG&E for power and gas, and EBMUD to estimate service restoration times. So telecommunications are initially the first off due to power outages, exacerbated by the spike in demand for voice and data services. This is very different from other lifelines, that more and more people will be wanting to suddenly use the service all at the same time as we all reach for our phones. And as well, some damage to the infrastructure, but it's really the spike in the demand on top of the power outage that is really makes that whole system vulnerable for use. And it's important to prepare for those communication outages when they're needed the most. The lingering service restoration times are the BART stations between Oakland and Fremont that are built to life safety codes, but not to be functional. The water systems will take months to restore, and David Briggs will speak to this collaboration, which was led by Dr. Keith Porter on the HayWired side. Next. Fire following earthquake is a cascading hazard involving all these lifelines. So the earthquake shaking and ground failure causes gas and electrical fires. Some fires spread when response is hindered by lost communications, a shortage of fire trucks, they've already gone to another fire, damaged roads and bridges interfering with access, and broken water pipes that cut off water needed to fight the fires. So you can get this image of how they can spread. So it's very important to prevent the fire at the source and look around your place for how they could start, and have a fire extinguisher on hand and know how to use it. Next. Everything HayWired is documented in these 3 volumes of peer-reviewed reports about the hazards, the engineering implications, and the societal consequences. The good news is that you don't have to read thousands of pages, as we have built immediately accessible exercises. Next. So the HayWired exercise toolkit turns things around and starts with your concerns and backs exercises with materials pulled from those volumes. So they were created with the leadership of the Earthquake Country Alliance and the California Resiliency Alliance. And the toolkit spans preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation considerations. And here I'm also featuring the tools for water planning and preparedness and wastewater response. Next. There are other products too. The video is popular. In the blue text, I acknowledge and appreciate other East Bay MUD contributions to our Lifeline workshop, to hosting a big idea workshop, to participating in both public rollouts, and for helping us improve our aftershock forecast for decision makers. And then finally, I'll tell you a bit more about the story map in the top right. Next. This is about how sea level rise may affect the liquefaction hazard. So we conducted this study because HayWired collaborators and partners asked us about it. So recall that a high water table is part of the recipe for liquefaction, and sea level rise causes groundwater rise. And the answer to the question is that soils that are highly susceptible as an artificial fill are highly sensitive to sea level rise. That's the red line in the graph. In the middle, some natural soils will steadily increase from low to medium liquefaction hazard potential with sea level rise. And then there's some soils which really will have a negligible response. So it's still very important to keep our eye on the most susceptible soils to liquefaction. Next. So I thank hundreds of HayWired Scenario contributors and partners, including East Bay MUD for hosting tonight, and I appreciate your attention. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wein, for the presentation on the HayWired scenario and grounding us as to what could happen in the event of a major earthquake here in the Bay Area. So I wanted to now shift the presentation to someone who plays a pivotal role in ensuring that EBMUD is ready for whatever comes our way. I see there are a couple of hands raised. We're going to hold questions until the end after our next presenter speaks, and I'm excited to introduce our next speaker. Dave Briggs is East Bay MUD's Director of Operations and Maintenance. Dave oversees the operation and maintenance of the facilities that serve our 1.4 million water customers and approximately 750,000 wastewater customers. But that's not all. He's also the Emergency Operations Director for East Bay MUD, which means when disaster strikes, Dave is the one in charge of EBMUD's response. He'll be leading our efforts to ensure that water keeps flowing when we need it most, especially after an earthquake. Dave's background is impressive. He earned his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from UC Davis and went on to receive both a master's and Ph.D. from Stanford University in the same field. Before coming to East Bay MUD, he held similar managerial roles at San Francisco's Public Utilities Commission, so he's no stranger to running complex systems. And here's what makes Dave's perspective even more valuable. He's a local. He lives here in Oakland, right near the Hayward Fault. So he's not just preparing our water system for the next big earthquake. He's also living with the same risks as all of us in the audience here. So tonight, Dave's going to walk us through EBMUD's earthquake preparedness plans and what it takes to keep our system resilient. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dave Briggs.
Okay, thank you, Joe. How's the sound?
Sounds great.
Okay, great. And thank you so much for all the collaboration over the years and for really setting the table here for the natural hazard that we're all challenged with, both in the utility business as well as local government. So for the next 15 or 20 minutes or so, I'm gonna, this is the outline for what I'll cover. A brief overview of East Bay MUD's water and wastewater systems, and then I want to discuss all of the investments that we've made in seismic upgrades. We really have put a lot of energy, and other utilities have as well, and other public works projects, to try to minimize the impact of an earthquake once it does occur. And then after the earthquake, talk about how we would respond and how we would recover and how we're organized so that we can get back on our feet as quickly as possible. And then the last part, a brief reminder of what you can do at the personal level to make your life easier. Okay, let's go to the next slide, Joe. Okay, so we're showing here East Bay MUD's water service area in color. And as Joe mentioned, we serve over 1.4 million customers in Western Alameda and Western Contra Costa County. It's a complicated system. We get most of our water from 100 miles from here in the Sierra Nevada, and that's not shown on the graphic here. But that water crosses one or more faults on its way to our customers. And luckily and fortuitously, many of our customers can receive water from our source up in the Sierra exclusively by gravity. So we don't, if we do lose power or do have damage to a pump station after an earthquake, we can still get water flowing to many parts of the service area, which could probably come in handy. On the wastewater side, our wastewater service area serves about 750,000 customers. A subset of that orange area that's shown, Berkeley, Oakland, Alameda, and a handful of other cities. But there are many other wastewater utilities that serve customers in our water service area. Our wastewater service area is just a portion of it. Back to water real quick. On the water side, we do have a lot of challenges delivering water, although some of our customers can receive it, the lower elevation customers, via gravity flow. We do serve customers almost to 1,500 feet, which obviously requires a lot of pumping. And let's go to the next slide. So in terms of investment, obviously Loma Prieta in '89 was a huge wake up, and East Bay MUD launched a defined and hundreds of millions of dollars worth of seismic upgrades that began in earnest in 1995 with construction. All of that investment continues today. Everything we do at East Bay MUD, when we put new facilities online and we design them, we have seismic strengthening in mind. So really this $350 million investment is growing every time we improve and upgrade infrastructure. But this is a large amount of money, but it's a awesome investment, and it's a wise investment because we know that if we can get this, if our service area survives an earthquake, does better in an earthquake, and recovers faster after an earthquake, our customers and our economy will recover faster, and this investment will pay for itself multiple times over. So our customers have made this investment, and they will be rewarded for this if we ever do suffer a large earthquake in this region. So I'm not going to cover all of the investments we've made, but just to highlight a few general categories. We have looked at our local dams and looked at seismic vulnerabilities of our local dams and reinforced them. We have looked at our treated water reservoirs. We have dozens of them. Many of them are in the hills. Many of them are near the Hayward Fault. We have reinforced them so they will survive an earthquake. Similar, we have looked at all of our pumping plants. I'm going to talk more specifically about the Claremont Tunnel and the Southern Loop in a moment. So we'll come back to that. And I'm also going to talk about the fault crossing, so I won't dwell on that as well here. but we've also invested in our buildings for life safety for our employees and our workers to make sure that they can be in buildings that are not hazardous. And our water treatment plants have been upgraded as well with many seismic upgrades. It's very important to keep water potable after a seismic event. And water treatment plants contain chemicals that we want to make sure are contained and do not spill after a seismic event. And so we've made upgrades to ensure that doesn't happen. The last thing I would mention is that interties with other water utilities. We have a large intertie with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission in Hayward. We have other interties with our other water districts that we are neighbors to, Contra Costa Water District, and in Zone 7, we have interties. So if we can help each other out, if one of us is in better shape than the other after a seismic event, these are significant improvements over what we had 20 years ago, and will make a big difference in our resiliency. Let's go to the next slide, Joe. Okay, so let's look a little more closely at the Hayward Fault. So the orange line moving diagonally there that Joe is pointing out, as you can see, literally cuts our surface area in half. And all of those dots on that orange line, which is the Hayward Fault, represent the orange dots represent ice places where we can jump a fault or we call them fault crossings. So they're parts of our distribution system where pipes cross the fault, and I'll show this on a slide next in more detail. But you can see they're all configured near and around the fault. The other dots represent upgrades to pump stations and reservoirs. But I did want to highlight here that white pipe, if you will. It's a tunnel right in the middle that Joe is circling right now. That is the Claremont Tunnel. On many days, a lot of our water that serves the western part of our service area comes through the Claremont Tunnel and needs to cross the Hayward Fault, where it then splits into larger transmission mains that go throughout the western side of our service area. So let's look a little bit, let's look closer to the right and look at these schematics. This represents the engineering and the ingenuity that went into this fault crossing. This is fascinating. So we're looking down now at a part of the Claremont Tunnel that crosses the Hayward Fault. It's the Hayward Fault zone. So this is about a few hundred feet of what is a 3-mile long tunnel. And as the schematic on the right shows, we have reinforced this tunnel, and we have inserted a very strong carrier pipe in the middle of this tunnel as it straddles the fault. So if you pan downward and see that if we do see a large displacement from a Hayward event that could be several feet of horizontal and or vertical displacement, this could result in a partial collapse of the Claremont Tunnel, this very important lifeline of water to the western side of our service area. So that carrier pipe is designed to withstand that loading and will allow water to keep flowing even if that red zone in the middle is covered with debris and blocked. So this is an ingenious solution. It's been in place for about 20 years and has significantly helped our ability to keep water flowing after an event. The last thing I'll point out here is the southern loop, and that's in that grayish blue color at the bottom. That connects effectively the east side of our service area to the west side of our service area. That's a high capacity pipeline. We can run it in both directions. And another way we can get across the fault in case we have other conveyance difficulties or damage further to the north. Next. Okay, so now we're going to look a little bit more closely at what I was explaining earlier about a fault crossing. So these are smaller diameter pipes, 12-inch diameter, smaller, maybe a little larger, but these are smaller distribution pipes. And you can see that the concept is pretty simple. On the left, you're looking at a pipe that could be ruptured in an earthquake. So this is a buried pipeline, and it could be sheared and damaged in an earthquake. We would isolate the break because we have valves on both sides of the fault, and we have connections, which we call manifolds, that come above ground and allow us to connect a flexible hose, if you will, and essentially jump the fault above ground. We can deploy these in a matter of hours, and we have many of them in case to correspond to all the places where we might have damage. So this is another way that we're going to be very resilient after an earthquake. Next slide, Joe. Thank you. Okay, so let's look a little bit closer at the distribution system, because this is another example of resiliency. So we're just showing a portion of the service area here, mostly central Oakland. And a few things to point out. First is that we have a grid. Our water system is essentially a grid. We have a water pipe on every street. And that adds to resiliency, because if there's a problem in one part of the grid with valving, we can operate around it and isolate the break or the problem while we're keeping everybody else pressurized and in water. The other thing to point out is that we generally distribute water from big to small. So the dark blue pipelines represent generally our largest transmission mains. Those will flow into the yellow pipelines that are a bit smaller, and then finally into the light blue, which gets down to the street level where we serve water to customers. So your individual service connection to your house or to your business or to your property is likely connected to one of these light blue pipes. And what we do, we're replacing about 25 miles of this pipe a year. And as we replace it, we look at the geotechnical conditions and we upgrade the pipe so that it can handle any type of seismic issue that there may be at that location. Many places, we don't have to enhance the seismic engineering, but in some locations we do. And that makes the system more resilient year after year as we rebuild this pipe. And then finally, I wanted to stress that it's very important to make sure that we can at least get water to a neighborhood after an earthquake. So we talk about a resilient grid here at East Bay MUD, and that means that we want to make sure that a neighborhood, so say a 10 block by 10 block area in the urban environment, we want to make sure that at least one pipe after an earthquake has been rebuilt to a high seismic standard so that we can keep that neighborhood back in water. And yes, you might have to walk a few blocks to get water after a large seismic event. You may not have water at your house, but you may be only a short walk away from a water supply. Next slide, Joe. Okay, this is a little bit more detail. I wish I had a better photo that kind of showed this a little bit better, but what that upper right-hand photo is showing is one of our seismically engineered pipes. This technology was pioneered by the Japanese, who have a tremendous amount of experience with seismicity in their country. And you can't quite tell because this photograph isn't good enough, but the joint is really, which is where those two pipes come together in that upper photo, that's where the magic happens. Pipes will tend to pull apart or want to pull apart in a seismic event. If there is liquefaction of soil, the soil will generally sink. And what that'll do is it makes the pipe alignment longer, and it'll want to pull apart at this joint. These joints have extra strength in them to resist that type of force, and they also have flexibility, so they won't leak or break, and they can bend quite a bit. So we put this pipe in when we know we have a challenging seismic environment for when we're replacing pipe. I guess the final thing to mention is that we're also installing additional valves in the system in strategic locations that help us create that resilient grid and that stronger grid to at least at the neighborhood scale after an earthquake. Thanks, Joe. Okay, so I talked about the very, very large, and I just talked about the very small. This is kind of in between our transmission mains. And we have a group at East Bay MUD that does all of the engineering on these transmission pipelines. And this is just two examples that have already been completed. One is in the Rockridge area on the left. That's the Dingy Backbone pipeline that was completed about 10 years ago. And another pipe upgrade, large diameter pipe, was completed near Mills, I guess now Northeastern College. That was completed a few years ago. And we have an active transmission project getting rebuilt pipeline getting rebuilt right now, further to the north in the service area, and another one is planned. So we are working on pipes at all levels. Next slide. Okay, so I guess now some reality here. And even though we have put all of this money into making our system stronger and designing to a high level of seismic loading, the system itself is not going to be perfect after a very, very large earthquake. Some things will break. So let's talk about that a little bit and how we're going to handle it. So this list here is not, this is just a universe of possibilities. I'm not trying to say that all of this will happen. but certainly these are a list of possible things that could happen. Our water treatment plants. We have 5 water treatment plants. If they do experience or a very near seismic event or have a lot of ground acceleration, we could have damage. That could reduce the capacity of the water treatment plant, and it could also risk whether that water is potable or not. Our water storage reservoirs. So these are our treated water reservoirs in the hills. We have dozens of them. They are designed to survive an earthquake, but they could leak. They could be contaminated if a roof collapses or dirt or debris or something gets in the reservoir. We might lose potability. I talked a lot about the distribution system. Our pipes, some of them are going to break. We think the biggest pipes will have few breaks, and that is where we will focus our energy first. But those small individual service connections to your home or business, we have about 400,000 of those. Some of those may break. These are pipes that are 3/4 of an inch, 5/8 of an inch in diameter. They're very, very small. Many of those may break. I'll talk more about that later. That's really the damage that we can expect in the distribution system. And then on the wastewater side, East Bay MUD collects wastewater from city-owned sewers, and we collect that with a set of interceptors that are near the bay shore. And then we treat it at a singular place near the Bay Bridge, and the effluent goes out to the bay. So if there is damage to the collection of wastewater, whether it's an East Bay MUD facility or a city-owned collection system, we could have a sanitation issue. And as well as if our water treatment plant is damaged near the Bay Bridge, that could upset the treatment process, and we may have effluent going into the bay that may not meet safety standards or regulatory standards. And then finally, this is what I was alluding to earlier, talking about that investment, that if we do have a large-scale disaster in this area, we've hopefully done everything we can to minimize that and to hasten our recovery, but we may not be selling as much water as we were the day before the earthquake, and that could be a financial impact to East Bay MUD. So that's just another place that we have to be concerned about. Next slide. Okay, so back to pipe breaks. So this directly follows on all of Ann's work at the USGS. So we know, and well, we've estimated, I should say, the places where we could have the most pipe breaks. And again, I wanted to stress that the breaks we're talking about here are not necessarily large diameter pipes. They're because we have so many more of them, and they're not built to a high degree of seismic standard. A lot of these pipes are going to be those service lines to individual properties that will likely break. But you can see here that there's a cluster, a hot zone, or this is a heat map showing where all those breaks could occur. This is statistical. It is a model. So take some of this with a grain of salt. But those hot spots in red they're that color because we tend to have more liquefaction. We have more challenging geotechnical conditions there. We have more brittle pipe there. We're near the fault. So that's why some of those clusters of pipe breaks may occur in those zones. But we are going to have a lot of breaks up and down. And while we are focused on repairing the pipes, as I mentioned, we hope to get that neighborhood level service established within a few weeks, hopefully a short number of weeks. But individual service lines to customers could take well beyond that. And there's a graphic that'll make that more clear coming up. Okay, and here it is. Okay, so thousands of breaks could occur immediately following an earthquake. So on looking at the chart on the left, or the graphic on the left, time is on the bottom, logarithmically for a number of days. So day 1 would be the earthquake, and up the vertical axis is the number of repairs that we would need to make based on the number of breaks that we saw. So you see that most of the breaks are on the west side. That's where the big fault is. This is a Hayward event. Even though there are faults in the eastern side of the service area, we are focused on the Hayward event here. So most of the breaks are focused on the west. And over time, we probably won't make a lot of progress in the first 10 days as we're assessing and organizing mutual aid and organizing ourselves for repairs, but then we would slowly start to repair over the weeks ahead and recover service to the entire service area over 100 days or 150 days or so. Next slide. Okay, so how are we going to do this? And really, as a team, and we do work on this. We have a plan. We exercise it. We have a lot of great partners, and it's important to stress that in an event this large, we can expect the county, the state, and the federal government to come in and help us form what we call a unified command to manage the incident. So we would be part of that unified team. This broader government team would generally run the EOT, the Emergency Operations Team, and it would help manage mutual aid in all sorts of ways, whether it was food or repair crews or help for PG&E or whatever it was. A lot of the mutual aid would be managed by this team. This team would support the local authorities making decisions about which areas are evacuated, which areas need what type of support, and those local decisions usually are respected based on what I've seen in many large events. This bigger group would help us with security. We don't have the security force to handle a security perimeter around Oakland or around Berkeley if we had a large-scale evacuation. So there'd be a security perimeter that would probably be manned by sheriff or National Guard. So this unified team would help with security and also handle mass evacuations and as well as repopulation when the conditions allow. So this large-scale help would help us with these very large issues that could happen in our region. Of course, full activation will depend on an emergency declaration. And I did also want to mention just last here that, because I get this question a lot of what drives evacuations and what allows you to go back home. Of course, it's a hard question to answer. It's very situation specific, but generally if there's hazards on the ground or in the air or no access or the structure itself is possible for imminent collapse, that is not a situation where people are going to be allowed to occupy a structure or a home. Not having water in and of itself is probably not going to drive an evacuation. Not having wastewater could, and because it could become a sanitation issue if the wastewater system is not working at all. Next slide. Okay, so what are we going to be doing? So we'll be part of this bigger team. But when it comes to plumbing, we are going to be pretty focused. And we're going immediately after the event, you can trust that we'll be very busy assessing the damage, determining who among our workforce is able to help. We do not expect our entire workforce to be able to respond. Some of our workforce may have lost their home or lost a loved one or may not be in the right personal situation to be able to help us. We know that, but still we do have to figure out who is able to work and respond. And that's one of the first things that we'll be doing. We'll establish our communication lines. We'll establish communication with the broader emergency operations team at the state or federal level. We'll start working on mutual aid. And then tactically, we will start to look at fixing the biggest pipes and work our way to the smallest pipes. On the supply side, the number one thing that we will try to do following an earthquake is to keep the water system pressurized. That supports firefighting, that prevents contamination into the distribution system. And if we can, we'll keep it potable. But in a large-scale disaster, most likely a generalized boil water notice could be declared out of an abundance of caution and being conservative. And as we prove with water sampling that the water is safe and potable, with authorization from the state, we would then lift that boil water order. Of course, we will be trying to recover any kind of wastewater service that was damaged. And everyone will want to know what the state of things is. So we will be continuously communicating to everybody where we are with the water system, when it will be recovered, and what's going on in your neighborhood. Next slide. Okay, so the part that I've left out so far is that if you consider that we may not be able to have a fully functioning water system after a significant Hayward event for weeks or for weeks, say. So what do we do in the interim? And we will be working, and we do work closely with cities and counties to know what their plans are to help people and help communities. So we work with them to learn where they may be setting up their shelters and their points of distribution for supplies. The photograph on the right there is from North Carolina. a couple of weeks ago with water trucks lined up. There's 2 or 3 of them there, and people walking thousands of feet, many blocks to pick up their water in a container that they would provide and bring back to their home so they can stay in their home. So we would be supporting this. There's many vendors that are ready to supply this type of service through a water tanker truck or bottled water. FEMA, the Red Cross, National Guard are all equipped, and state of California are all equipped and ready to provide these types of water supplies to people. And in addition to that, what we will do at EBMUD, and that's the photograph on the lower left, is as we recover pipes at the distribution level and declare them potable, we can set up what we call a water manifold, which is essentially a pipe connected to a hydrant. The hydrant is hiding there behind, and the pipe has 8 spigots or so connected to it. So this can effectively act as a community water source once we inspect the water and make sure it's okay. So this is another part that we would do to help the community stay in their homes and be more resilient and recover faster. Next slide. Okay, mutual aid. So we do practice this all the time. EBMUD gets calls to support other people in need, and we would expect others to come help us, whether that was help from across the bay in San Francisco or Los Angeles or Reno or Las Vegas, depending on where the help needed to come from. It is a big part of the equation, and it's going to play a big role in recovering quickly. So some of this mutual aid is reimbursable by state and federal government sources and funding. Some of it is not. So that's another factor we consider before we would, call for mutual aid or respond. And then important to note that any crews that do respond in our service area that are helping us with water would generally be under our supervision. We want the repairs done our way, and we want to be able to keep track of everything and communicate to our customers. So we're used to this. When we responded to Napa in 2014, we reported to them. We did what they wanted us to do. We repaired their pipes the way they wanted them repaired, and we hastened their recovery there. But this is a big deal. It could significantly shorten our recovery from months to weeks, and it's not going to be available immediately after the event because there'll be so many other life safety issues in play and so many logistics that we have to set up ahead of time. I'd say on the slide 72 hours, but realistically, it's probably going to be 4 or 5 days before, or even longer before we have any meaningful mutual aid show up to fix pipes. Okay, I think I'm on my last slide, and I think, Joe, we're doing okay on time. So if you've lived around here, you probably know and have heard these messages about what you should be doing at home. So for those that haven't, and just because we're on a special anniversary of Loma Prieta, and we should all be thinking about this right now, just a reminder to please store water at home, ideally 2 hours per day, up to 7 days per person. That's a lot of water. And if you live in an apartment building or multi-unit housing, that with many people in your household, that's not going to be that easy, but store as much as you can. Emergency kits, you should have one. I was talking to a friend a couple weeks ago, and my friend asked me, like, what kind of things do people typically forget to put in an emergency kit? I mean, we know about food, we know about water, we know about cash, but heat sources, camping gear. I have spare eyeglasses in my emergency kit. I was telling Joe earlier, I will definitely be a net drain on society if I do not have my glasses on. So I have a spare set of glasses in my emergency kit. Make a plan, share it with your family. You guys may not be in the same place when this event happens. You may need to communicate your status with each other. That might be very difficult, and you may have a meeting location. Other sources are outlined there. PG&E has a lot of great information as well. So does Cal OES, Red Cross, ready.gov. I think that's federal. Yeah, that's federal. And that is what I have. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Dave. In the spirit of Halloween, I think everybody is thoroughly scared now after listening to your presentation. Very informative, getting lots of rounds of applause and thumbs up from the audience. So that's great. Now we're going to move into question and answer. So we have a lot of questions in the Q&A, so keep them coming as we're answering these. The first question that was asked, Dave, is from also David. EBMUD has spent large money on seismic upgrades. Have other utilities with interties to EBMUD made similar investments?
Yeah, most definitely, and I think that the first one that comes to mind is the San Francisco PUC, who are on the other side of that really big intertie. So it's very helpful that we have a large intertie connected to a partner who's robust enough to be able to help us in a seismic event. But yeah, there's most utilities, Bay Area utilities, as well as telecom, PG&E have made significant seismic upgrades. Local government, public works projects, libraries, city hall. There's literally been billions of dollars in the Bay Area spent on seismic upgrades in the last 20 years.
Great. David, I hope that answers the question. Next question is for either Dr. Wein or David. From Faye Cooper, if my house is earthquake retrofitted, bolted to the foundation, does it help to not get red tagged? Do you know?
And if you, I mean, I can take a stab at that unless you want to take it.
Sorry, I missed the question.
It's okay. It's if my house is earthquake retrofitted, bolted to the foundation, does it help to not get it red tagged?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, yes.
Nice, easy.
I would agree.
Yes.
If a 7+ earthquake hits and there are lots of pipe breaks, oh, I just lost the question mid-question. I'm sorry. New questions coming in, changing the chat on me. If a 7+ earthquake hits and there are a lot of pipe breaks, including transmission lines, which carry large volumes of water, it could rapidly drain reservoirs. Does EBMUD employ some type of mechanism to isolate the break, to mitigate the loss of water?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. We have seismically triggered valves at many of our reservoirs that are programmed to shut and isolate if they sense a lot of ground acceleration and a loss of pressure downstream. But even if we do have a lot of losses in our water system, if we can keep up the water production at the treatment plants, we would keep the water flowing even though large amounts of it would be spilling out. And the primary reason for that is to support firefighting and to keep the system pressurized, as much of the system pressurized as we possibly could. After the Napa earthquake in 2014, their demand, quote unquote, went up 50%. So a lot of that was spilling out, but they as long as they could keep up the water production on the water treatment plant side, they just kept feeding the system. It's probably the better move. If you can't keep up the water and you're slowly draining the system, then you have to make the somewhat tortuous choice of isolating it to save it, because just letting it bleed out to the point where there's zero left isn't going to do anybody any good.
Thanks, Dave. Dr. Wein, this is a question from Thomas. Are tsunami preparations a major concern for the Bay water?
Yeah, question. A tsunami with the earthquake? It's not likely that there would be much of a tsunami created by an earthquake in the Bay Area, but we do have a tsunami scenario where the tsunami comes from the Aleutian Islands into the Bay Area. So I'm not sure. It depends on the source. And in that scenario, it does flood the ports and low-lying ground at the northern end of the bay. It sort of peters out by the time you get to the southern end.
Fascinating to think about. This next question that's come in is from Evelyn. Dave, PG&E is an essential partner in recovery. How is EBMUD and PG&E coordinating training, mutual aid, etc.?
Well, we see each other a lot and coordinate on responses. We would be involved in the same emergency operations team. Many people at EBMUD have personal contacts at PG&E. We're both, essentially in the utility business. Presently right now, we are dealing with PG&E quite frequently because we're in the public safety power shutoff season. And so we're in constant contact with them.
I've got a question here, Dave. How well retrofitted is the main wastewater plant down by the Bay Bridge?
I know they've made some upgrades. They're better than they were 20 years ago. I think they have some very challenging soil conditions down there because there's a lot of bay mud. I don't know specifically what would happen to that plant if we had a 7.0 type of major earthquake on the Hayward Fault. So I'd have to probably be careful with answering that without getting some more information. Which we could do later.
Does EBMUD have a backup plan assuming distribution or disruption of service from Olu?
Okay, so yeah, I think that is so. After a seismic event, as we are busy repairing pipes, there's several ways of getting water to a community that I had essentially on one of those slides. So is there a backup plan? Well, I would say there's multiple ways of getting water. I've seen pallets of water being helicoptered in, trucked in by the National Guard, delivered by the Red Cross on pallets or small tanks or individual bottles, as well as the tanker trucks where you would sort of bring your own container. So there's many different ways of getting water to a community. And as I mentioned, we're seeing this right now in North Carolina. But that's, yeah, so I would say there really isn't a backup plan. It's probably better characterized as there's more than one way of doing it.
And just for the sake of time, I know we have a lot of questions that have come in into the Q&A. If we aren't able to answer your question here tonight, feel free to send them to waterwednesday@ebmud.com, and we'll be sure to get you an answer. The last question that we're going to take here is, and it was in line with that, does EBMUD have their own power supply, Dave?
The short answer is yes. So I think by that, obviously on a day-to-day basis, we're getting line power from PG&E. But yeah, we are well seasoned and well practiced and well prepared for a loss of electricity. We have dozens of generators. Many of them are pre-deployed right now up in the hills because we don't know if we're going to have a PSPS event from PG&E. And all of our critical facilities have backup generators. And on top of that, kind of a third level of belt and suspenders is we have mobile generators. So if the generators that we have on site right now, for whatever reason, we have additional generators we can bring out. That's one area we have pretty well covered.
Right. Well, thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dr. Wein. Appreciate both presentations. I'm sure the community does as well. That brings us to the end of tonight's Water Wednesday, not just tonight's, but the final Water Wednesday of 2024. And that was some way to wrap up the year. Before we close, I do have some homework for the audience. It's easy. First, if you haven't done so already, sign up for emergency alerts at ebmud.com/subscriptions. It's a crucial step to ensure you're in the know when it matters most. Second, follow us on social media, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, or LinkedIn at ebmud_water. You don't want to miss our Day Without Water video coming out tomorrow. Drop a wave in the comments so that I know you've seen it. And as a special bonus for you being here tonight, you'll be the first to know that we're launching a giveaway on Instagram this Friday that is related to tonight's webinars. Keep an eye out for that announcement. And so just to recap that, subscribe to emergency notifications, follow us on your favorite social media platform, and look out for our Instagram giveaway on Friday. And bringing this full circle, we spent tonight learning about the importance of earthquake preparedness, and that's something that we should all take very seriously here in the Bay Area. EBMUD has been hard at work to ensure that our water system is ready for the next big earthquake, but individual preparedness is key as well. So make it a priority. If you'd like to rewatch tonight's event or share it with others, the recording will be available on EBMUD's YouTube channel. Just search East Bay Mud on YouTube, and you'll be able to find it along with all of our previous Water Wednesday webinars and other great content that we've made. Don't forget to follow us on social media and stay informed about construction, emergency alerts, and events just like this one. On behalf of all of us at East Bay Mud, thank you for joining us tonight and throughout 2024. We'll see you next year for more Water Wednesdays. Until then, stay safe, stay prepared, and have a great evening.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you, Dr. Wein.
Thank you. That was great.